Hi, everybody. My name is Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America, and I have a very special interview with you here today. I'm here with Bob Quinn, a 30-year regenerative organic farmer for ancient grains. And Bob, I want you to tell people a little bit about yourself before you get started. We have a great interview today. I can't wait to talk about it.
Okay, that'd be great. Well, I'm a farm boy. I was raised on the wheat and cattle ranch where my father was raised before me, and my grandfather started in 1920. So next year we'll celebrate 100th anniversary of our farm and cattle ranch. And I went to local schools near Big Sandy, where we lived near, and on to Montana State University to study science and plants. So I studied botany and plant pathology, getting a BS and an MS there at Bozeman at Montana State. And then I went on to study at UC Davis and earned a doctorate in plant biochemistry. And after a couple of years, I came back to the farm, and now my whole farm is my laboratory and my garden. And it's been a great trip, a lot of fun.
So you really are more of like a scientist and a farmer, right? And a family man. You've got a great
Yes.
family too. And a businessman, right?
That's right. All of the above, I guess.
And now you've added to your resume author of the book Grain by Grain. It's a really fantastic book. I am really very happy with how you wrote it. You and Liz Carlisle. It's a warm read. It's like you just feel like you want to have a piece of bread and a cup of cocoa and just enjoy this book. So we want to get right into it. I mean, you're in Montana. You're farming. You're connecting with community. You're training other farmers on how to grow organic kamut, which is an ancient grain. And you decide to write this book. And what I'm struck by is how you really cover what's happening with the food supply, like the entire food supply in the beginning of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Can you summarize that?
Well, what I see, and I didn't really realize it growing up or even going to college, because everybody said this is the way it's done and this is progress, and don't worry about a thing. We're making more bushels all the time with less acres, and everything's fine. And what I discovered that everything's not fine, that half my neighbors in the last 50 years have gone broke farming or left farming. They couldn't make a living or pass it on to the next generation. And the little town of Big Sandy has declined from 1,000 to not much, hardly 600 people now. Many businesses have closed as a result. And what's much more serious than that is the health condition of our people. It continues to deteriorate. And the more I study it, the more I see that health is linked with food. And even though we're very well fed in this country, we're not very well nourished. And so when I started experimenting with organic agriculture and seeing the results and studying the results of people who eat organic food, and particularly high nutritious food that's grown organically, I started to be convinced that we're really have been going in the wrong direction, focusing only on feeding the plant and trying to, by all imaginable science and other manipulations, increase the yields and lower the cost of food. So now we have cheap food in this country, but we're finding there's a very high cost for this cheap food.
But you didn't see, though, as a farmer that you could, or not, you didn't see it, but I guess what you saw was that using the chemicals and having a higher yield wasn't worth it to you? Weren't you attracted to that idea? I mean, they told all the farmers, you use these chemicals, you use GMOs, you're going to have higher yields, you're going to make more money, you're going to not have to hire as many farm laborers. That wasn't appealing to you?
Well, the idea to have bigger yields, of course, was appealing. But what really happened for these bigger yields, it cost us more money. And when prices went down, because everybody else is getting bigger yields too, so now we have more grain, depressing prices. We couldn't even hardly pay for our chemicals that we're using to make those higher yields. So it became a vicious cycle that was really counterproductive. We were farming more and putting more in the bin, but making less money. And
that's what's happening with the dairy industry right now. I know that's not your forte, but I hear that there's so much milk that's being produced. They're throwing it out, and the price that they're getting for the milk hasn't risen in like 20 years or something. So these farmers are going broke. 1,600 farmers in Wisconsin alone have lost their businesses in the past year or two.
And it's amazing to me that the industrialization of water has water on the market now, and milk so cheap that milk is cheaper than water. And so I tell my dairy friends, why don't you just bottle the creek going through your place and not put it through the cow, and you'll make a lot more money. But isn't that a paradox that water can be sold for more than food and the nutrition that is in healthy milk?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just upside down. And that's basically what you're talking about in your book, right? Is that what has happened with the food supply is topsy-turvy. And what you're looking to do is to bring it back to how traditional regenerative farming, when it thrived, right?
What I'm trying to do is, and the reason I wrote the book is to try to explain and to delineate more solutions and dwell on the problems. I try to outline the problems as I see them very quickly, and then focus on what we can do to solve those problems. And there's many solutions, and they really hinge around regenerative organic agriculture, and everything else is connected with that.
Yeah. Could you explain what regenerative organic agriculture is to the people who are maybe hearing that for the first time?
Well, if you look at what goes on in nature, you see a great deal of diversity. And that's how nature works. And that's how systems have stayed viable for thousands of years. And what we've tried to do here recently is adapt a great chemical experiment in America. And this deviated from what conventional agriculture has been doing for the last 10,000 years. A lot of people say, oh yeah, conventional agriculture can feed the world, and they're talking about a great chemical experiment. It's only less than 70 years old, and we're starting to see the wheels come off that bus. And we're having all kinds of degradation of the soil. We're having weeds that are resistant to herbicides. We're starting to see a decline in yields now, and we're having a loss of nutrition in our food. And we're having erosion, we're having pollutions that, we have glyphosate in our rain, for example. We have glyphosate contamination now in all the rivers, much of the soil, and we have dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico that's as big as the state of New Jersey. And I just keep asking people, how bad does it have to get? We can't drink, the people in Iowa can't hardly drink the water. It's not safe for the children because of the nitrate levels in it. How bad does it really have to get before we really think that maybe we're going in the wrong direction? And it's so simple with the adoption of rotations that mimic nature and the diversity found in nature, where we build our soils and focus on healthy soils and let the soils feed the plants, growing healthier plants that gives us more nutrition and therefore better health. And so we solve the health problem, which is enormous in this country. We solve the pollution problem, which is growing worse every day. We address climate change because of carbon sequestration. That's a great part of organic regenerative agriculture, especially using green manure and cover crops. And we also allow the farmers to take control of their own destiny back again.
Yeah, fantastic. Regenerative organic farming solves so many problems, or it contributes to the solution, right, of so many different problems: climate change, health, pollution, all of that, biodiversity, which is essential, right? So,
and everybody wins. Everybody wins.
Everybody wins. Yeah, except for Monsanto.
Well, okay, but they'll figure out a way
to
contribute to organic inputs, I'm sure, if they see that the trend starts to go that way. And it is starting to go that way. We're still only 6% of the total food in America is organic, but it's taken 40 years to get there since I started, from near 0 to 6%. But if we continue at the current rate, it's the fastest growing segment of food in America. Another 40 years, we'll be nearing 100%. And that's the future, and that's the next generation I'm really cheering on and encouraging to finish the job that we started.
Yeah, really great. In your book, you talk about how $50 billion worth of organic food is being sold now every year, over 5% of total U.S. food sales. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's over 6. So it's
really great.
Even from the time we wrote that.
Yeah, and I like how you talked about the higher quality products. They've been mentioning that they were like, there's value added. Well, you said a better term for these fortified processed foods would be value subtracted, right? Because they took they took value out of the food by processing them so much. And
Right.
then they tried to add in vitamins. I mean, I love this whole conversation that you have about the food supply. And I put in a note, how about value preserved or value retained is what grains has, right? The grains that you have in your hat right there, very lovely how you walk around the grains. Yeah. So you noticed that the food supply was not going in the right direction. You came back after all this years and years of schooling, and you started to grow grains. Why kamut, ancient grain? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Kamut is not the name of the grain, actually. It's a trademark that we use to market the wheat. And the common name for the wheat is Khorasan, but you can have any kind of Khorasan. You can even mix it and breed it with modern wheat and still call it Khorasan. In order to prevent that and guarantee that people were eating an ancient wheat, we use a trademark to guarantee our customers that it's organically grown, that it's 100% ancient grain, never mixed or blended with modern wheat. It's high in protein, high in minerals, and that the people have to tell the truth about it, which means that if they're going to say something, they better have some scientific research to back it up or well accepted and known facts about it. And that's why we use the trademark to protect the shoppers, so they know what they're buying and they're guaranteed that what they're buying is what they think they're getting. So that is the summary of the trademark. And we first noticed that people who could not eat modern wheat could eat this ancient grain. Not only could they eat it, but they felt better when they did eat it. And that really begged the question of what's going on and what have we done to our wheat that so many people cannot eat anymore. Nearly 20% of the population has some kind of trouble with it. Where less than, if you take those 20%, 85 to 90% of those can eat the kamut without any difficulty at all.
And yeah, I'm one of them. I just did that this week. So I went to the doctor years and years ago when I was sleeping 2 hours every day, and she said, you have a gluten intolerance. And when I got tested for it, blood tested, it was gliadin, the modern hybrid, the modern protein in the modern wheat. It wasn't the other types of gluten. So I thought I did avoid gluten for a very long time. But then when I found out that glyphosate can be sprayed on all types of grains, including soy, which can be in gluten-free food, right? Including chickpeas and potatoes, whatever, all these different items that they could be containing glyphosate, I started to look into the ancient grain, organic grains and ancient grains. And so this week I got your flour and I've made biscuits and bread, French bread and regular loaves of bread. It's so delicious. I have to say it's like almost creamy, right? It's like almost buttery and soft and it's so delicious. And I've had none of the rashes, none of the fatigue that I normally have. And I really thoroughly enjoy it. I think it's great. So I think for people who don't have celiac disease, but have a mild gluten intolerance, I would suggest that you try your kamut ancient grains. It's fantastic.
Most people can tolerate it. And there's four, if you have a problem with wheat, I tell people there's 4 things that you could try will probably eliminate 90 to 95% of your problems. First of all, eat organic. You avoid the glyphosate contamination that you mentioned. Eat ancient and heritage wheat that's never been hybridized or crossed so much in the last, since World War II at least, and changed so much. Eat sourdough. Look at slow fermentations or long fermentations, which pre-digest the gluten, pre-digest the protein, and make it easier to digest than when you eat it. And then eat whole grains. Don't throw away a third of the best part of the wheat by eating white flour. Eat the whole grain. And then you'll have all the nutrition that's there in the package in the first place. And if you follow those other 3 principles, you'll avoid most of what gives people trouble.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about that health trouble. In your book, after you talk about, by the way, your yield, I'd like to just mention that for a second first, that you came out way ahead as far as your yield when you started growing organically. I thought that was a really great part of the book. But then in the next chapter, you talk about, after gluten, you talk about food as medicine. And you did some studies, and these studies were fascinating to me. You actually did well, I'll let you talk about the studies, but you did these studies that actually showed that the ancient grain, this kamut ancient grain, can actually support health improvement, especially in the gut. And
Right.
with many different irritable bowel syndrome, insulin levels, oxidative stress and inflammation. So can you talk a little bit about these studies? So it's fascinating.
Well, they were a result of people who came to us and said, we can't eat modern wheat, but we can eat your stuff. And I thought to myself, well, what is going on? Why is that? There must be something we can identify that has been changed. Actually, with all the studies we've done, we've published 31 peer-reviewed journal articles now. We haven't really elucidated the mode of action. We don't really know for sure what's going on. It's probably not just one thing. Then because we're talking about a living system, living systems are very complex. And it's very rare that you can just have one thing going on that's controlling everything else. Especially if you're talking about food and living systems. You see, they're very complex. They're all full of secondary metabolites that contribute to different aspects that keep you healthy. And so that's the problem with refining food and saying, okay, well, I think it's this or that or the other thing, and we're going to refine that and concentrate it and put it in a pill. That's the ultimate. And I say, well, good night. Why are you doing that? Eat the whole thing. Eat the nutrition that's in the whole package. So we started out with an animal study, and we're looking at antioxidant capacity. And we knew that this grain had higher levels of selenium, which is a strong antioxidant. We figured we'd see something from that, and we did see it. We did find that there was a significant increase in antioxidant capacity compared to modern wheat. But what we didn't expect and stumbled onto was an extreme difference in inflammation. Anti-inflammatory. Modern wheat causes inflammation in small amounts, and this is anti-inflammatory. It actually stopped or reversed inflammation. And we know that inflammation is tied to all chronic disease. So immediately we switched from animal studies to human clinical trials looking at chronic disease. So we looked at heart disease, irritable bowel syndrome, diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, and we saw all the same thing. The biggest difference was the difference in inflammatory markers such as cytokines that you see in the blood. And the difference between the two diets was 35 to 45% difference. That's humongous. It's almost never seen in clinical studies.
Yeah, I'm going to read from your book. Subjects on the ancient wheat diet saw a 20 to 30% reduction in pro-inflammatory cytokines, and one of these cytokines, macrophage inflammatory protein, decreased by 38.9%. And then in another area, you say that the subjects with cardiovascular risk factors on the ancient wheat diet showed a dramatic drop in their insulin levels, 24%. That's huge. And their LDL went down by 6.8%. Total cholesterol down by 6.8, and LDL dropped by 8.1%. Blood glucose, right, decreased by 8%. I mean, these are really significant numbers. Also, you said subjects' insulin levels went down by 16.3%, and blood glucose dropped by 9.1%. This was out of the Carnegie University Hospital in Florence. That was a double-blind crossover study, right? Cholesterol and inflammation also went down, and antioxidant capacity went up. Yep. So, this is fascinating because so many diets claim that we shouldn't be eating grains at all, and this is exactly opposite of what they're saying. So, how do you explain this?
Well, I look at history. Look at the history of the world. The great civilizations, particularly the Western world, and even some parts of China, were based on wheat. For thousands of years, the Babylonians, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, I mean, they're all great civilizations built on diets of wheat. And yet, in the last 50 years, now all of a sudden, 20% of the people can no longer eat wheat. Many authors are calling it a poison that should be avoided. Well, if it was a poison that should be avoided, it would have never built the great civilizations of antiquity. So something must be different. The wheat that they were eating is not the wheat that we're eating today. That's the easy answer. And the way they grow it is not the way we grow it. And the way they process it is not the way we're processing it. So if you take all those together, you have a big difference from what our diet of modern wheat is to their diet of ancient grain, minimally processed or long fermentation with sourdough, using whole grains and not any chemicals in their agriculture. Those are the differences. And those differences have come together in different amounts to produce this big difference that we have today.
Yeah, and it is a big difference. I mean, you even say here that we found that it increases levels of health promoting mutualists of gut microbiota. So that means it actually supports a healthy microbiome in the gut.
Yes.
Yeah. See, that's the exact opposite of what modern wheat is doing with glyphosate sprayed on it. Modern wheat with glyphosate sprayed on it actually destroys the beneficial gut bacteria and allows for the pathogenic gut bacteria to proliferate, which can produce things like E. coli and salmonella, leading to, reoccurring UTIs, gut inflammation, brain inflammation, behavioral disorders, all kinds of things. The modern wheat today is destroying our kids' health because it's got glyphosate on it and it's got that gliadin protein in it. So much better to switch to ancient grains, organic ancient grains, really important. Now, but I have to ask, if somebody's growing ancient grains, are they likely to be spraying glyphosate as a drying agent? Is that really that common of a practice?
The further north you go, in North America, in the upper Great Plains, the northern Great Plains, the more you'll find it, because they're trying to get the crop in before winter comes. And so that's more and more important. But the other thing that's going on in the upper Great Plains, where we are in the northern Great Plains, is people are using glyphosate as a agent to allow them to chem fallow, which means we don't get enough rain to plant a crop every year. We only plant a crop every second year. In the alternate years, we're fallowing the ground. We're not allowing anything to grow. We used to fallow it using chisel plows and other implements to kill the weeds. Now they leave the stubble standing, which is better for the ground, of course, but they're spraying it with glyphosate, which is worse for the ground and all the bacteria that live in the soil. Of course, it's an antibiotic besides being a herbicide. So they spray those fields 3 or 4 times a year, and then they plant a wheat crop in that. And even though Monsanto has promised us that and guaranteed us that it would break down immediately upon touching the soil, that's not true. And it's a residual in the soil. And the more that you spray it, the more the residual is building up. And micro amounts are being then taken up by the plants and are found in the food, in the grain in this case. It's not enough to kill the plant, but it is enough to be detected at micro amounts that, and that's all you need to disrupt bacteria.
Yes, and it's very small amounts now that we're showing that actually cause or trigger aggressive breast cancer. There's a study just out last week with another, they call it a secondary factor, but that secondary factor is microRNA, which is in our bodies. It's not a secondary factor like jet fuel or, your gas fuel, right? It's a secondary factor in our bodies. So I think that sentence, the title of that study is a little bit misleading because that secondary factor is in our body. So I have it that glyphosate at very small levels, what you're talking about, nanograms, can trigger aggressive breast cancer growth. It can also trigger liver and kidney disease and sex hormone changes and all kinds of cell damage.
The long-term solution to all that is to eliminate glyphosate. But not only glyphosate, don't replace it with something even worse. Let's replace it with regenerative organic agriculture where everybody wins that we've already talked about. This is the thing that makes the most sense. We can't possibly afford any kind of healthcare program that's going to cover the increasing amount of chronic disease in this country. It doesn't matter what kind of healthcare system we have, the country's going to go broke. What we really need to do is study the cause of that disease. And once we understand the cause of it, then we can make changes that reduce it. And then the healthcare system is not so overburdened and it's not draining the wealth from the country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you. But we have to address the cause of all of these problems. And the cause is the GMO agrochemical farming and how we're all being poisoned every day. That's a major part of the cause. There are, of course, other pollutants and other factors, but our food supply is a major part of the cause. You are promoting the solution, and I highly recommend that everybody buy your book, Grain by Grain, and read it, and really just get present to how food is medicine and how we do have the solution. You just have a fascinating background here with all of your education and involvement with the organic industry and farming and training other farmers. And we had the pleasure of having you visit the EPA with us and tell them exactly what you just said, that regenerative organic farming is the solution. Wasn't that fun going to the EPA?
That was. And I tried to explain to them that we have a very average size, but a good sized farm in Montana of 4,000 acres. And for 30 years, we haven't needed these chemicals. So that not only that we don't need them, but also they're a detriment to us. And I wanted to make both of those cases. I was thankful for your effort to give me the opportunity to say such a thing, because I know that they don't hear that very much at all.
Yeah, I think it made a big difference for them. There were about, I think about 9 or 10 of them, right, that came into the room, and many of them from the Children's Health Hazard Assessment, division of the EPA. And for them to have a farmer come all the way from Montana to be with them in that room for an hour, I think is not something that happens, for them every day. And I really appreciate you being willing to come out there and share your story with them, because we gave them very compelling evidence. They are reviewing it right now.
Good.
And, yes, and all of the other studies that I brought them, a whole other stack of studies showing that glyphosate is harmful. At the very minimum, they need to stop allowing glyphosate to be sprayed as a desiccant. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, that's the easiest way. That's the easiest place to start. And we don't need that. We can swath our crops and let them dry in the sun for a couple of days. I know it's a little more risky, but it's not as risky as bad health. We need to stop worrying about producing such an overabundance of cheap food and look to start nourishing our population in a way that heals them.
Yes.
It's way more important to heal our bodies than to fill our stomachs with products that actually deteriorate our health of our bodies.
Yeah, and speaking of nourishing and nutrients, when they spray as a chem fallow, right, and they spray the ground, and undoubtedly the wheat takes up the glyphosate in their roots, wouldn't you?
The next year.
Okay, but wouldn't you think that, or when they spray it on as a drying agent, right on top of the wheat?
Then it's going right into the kernels.
Right into the kernels. Wouldn't you think that wheat would be less nutritious? Because we know that glyphosate is a chelator. It grabs onto and holds and makes unavailable the vital nutrients of any living thing it touches. So wouldn't that wheat have less nutrition in it?
Well, and probably a more significant factor of what it's doing to the microbiome of our gut and preventing what nutrition might be there from being utilized properly and going
utilized properly. Okay. But yeah, but what I'm saying is that, Dr. Don Huber, a 50-year plant pathologist, looked at results from food that was tested for nutrient quality. And he said that the levels of manganese and potassium and magnesium were abysmal. Like he's like, I wouldn't even call that food. And it wasn't wheat that I was showing the test for. But I could imagine that if wheat's being directly sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent and it's a chelator, that it would be making those nutrients unavailable to us when we digest it.
Yes, that also can happen. Can happen.
Yeah, so I would be very concerned about that as well. Well, is there anything else that you want to share about your book or about being a regenerative organic farmer?
Well, nationally, I appreciate so much the work you're doing, but I think that the sooner that we can get people thinking about reconnecting food and health, the stronger driver we'll have to make the changes we need to redirect the course that we're taking, that goes away from industrial chemical agriculture and goes to a system that produces better food, healthier farms, healthier farmers, healthier eaters, and a healthier planet.
Yeah, wonderful. And how can people try your grains? Where would they go to right now? Where are some places?
Well, you can find them in any health food store. Bob's Red Mill carries flour and grain, almost any health food store. If you want to ready to eat, Nature's Path heritage cereals is mostly kamut. If you like pasta, Eden Foods makes whole grain kamut pasta. And many small bakers scattered now all over the country are starting to make more and more kamut bread.
That's great. Oh, and I got my grains from Azure Standard. Azure Standard sells the kamut.
Okay, good.
Kamut as well, yeah. So very, very good. Well, we hope that you try Bob's kamut ancient grains, and you get his book, and you found this useful. really fascinating about the studies that you did. Thank you so much for investing in the future of our health by investing the money into those studies, showing that. Now, if they want to see those studies, where are they?
Oh, that's a good question. Just go on our website, kamut.com, and click on nutrition, and under research, you'll find all of the references and many of the direct links. So you can look at the whole study in its published form yourself.
That's great. Yeah, and they spent over $2 million of it, but they do highlight the results in your book, Grain by Grain, in the book and the chapter Food is Medicine. So thank you very much for being here with us today, Bob. Always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, my honor. I really enjoy visiting with you, Sam.
Yeah,
Keep up the
appreciate
good work. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too, and love to your family. And by the way, your crackling kamut snacks are delicious. Everybody should try those as well. If you see them out in your grocery stores, it's called crackling kamut, right? The little snacks.
Yep. And you can go online and order those directly from us at the factory here in Big Sandy, Montana. So.
Oh, cool. Great.
Yeah.
So you can try his snacks. They're great snacks for people to have. Okay. So thank you
you
very much for being with us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.